We can go to. So welcome everyone. I want to thank you for being here today. Thank you all for those who've attended or it's your first time. We're really excited to have you. We're really excited for our speaker and everything that we're going to gain from today's discussion, lecture, and our time together in the class. And I want to remind you and point to you about our class site. If you scan this QR code or you're able to, sorry, one second. You're able to see the classroom site there. So next slide. So just some more information on the course you'll find on the website. So this year we're talking about what possible worlds we want to see built. It's a very timely topic and something that we all hope to explore as a group and within our own selves as we're going on through the semester. But what you'll find on the website is course information, the planning committee who's all involved, session information, the instruction team, syllabus, and other objectives for the course. Next slide. Just some reminders for the class. Please maintain the Zoom controls, stay on mute unless you're it's time for Q&A or you're called on. We have a land acknowledgement that's also visible through our website that we uphold for this course, and then we want to maintain true throughout the semester. So we're just really respecting the land and those that came before us. There is a content warning that at times the lecture may contain material that is difficult to discuss. If at any point you feel that you need to care for yourself, please step away and find a way to kind of decompress from the topics. If you ever need any support from us, please let us know privately in the chat. And we'll be there to kind of maybe give you some ideas on how to kind of ground yourself. Next slide, please. So just to kind of go a little bit more into the land acknowledgement, the course theme this year is about praxis, which is putting theory into action and asking ourselves, what are the alternatives that are possible to see a just world? As a class, we recognize the importance of Indigenous liberation and sovereignty. As Dr. Murray encouraged us to do in the first class, a land acknowledgement is not just a statement, it's a call to action. And it also reflects on this week's course or this week's session. What actions can we take to right the historical wrongs of colonization, state violence, and support Indigenous community struggles for self-determination and sovereignty? So relevant from our course objectives is to describe the impact of history on public health, articulate the importance of history, laws, policies, and power structures to understand the health of the public, describe key historical, social, and cultural political factors related to these contemporary issues that disadvantage marginalized groups, and also evaluate the ways and power structures and systems of oppression have shaped injustices throughout history. Also exploring modern examples of what this resistance looks like. So these are just kind of touching off of our course objectives. Next slide, please. So today we're very happy to have Sari Bilick. She's the organizing program director at the Human Impact Partners. She's based in the Bay Area in California on unassended Lijan Holy Land. Sari leads the organization's work, including co-coordinating Public Health Awaken, a national network of public health professionals organizing for health, equity, and justice. She has over 15 years of experience in organizing, and just before joining HIP, Human Impact Partners, she worked in labor, community, and political organizing. She brings an extensive experience in leadership development, training, and coalition building. Sari has engaged public health practitioners, healthcare and service workers, immigrants, tenants, and domestic workers, and faith communities to take action around a wide range of economic and social justice issues. She is passionate about organizing and mobilizing communities around issues most important to them and bringing a social justice equity lens into all spaces. And with that, I'll turn it over to our presenter.
Great, thank you. Let me just pull up my screen. Give me one moment. Let's see. Okay, can you all see that slide? Yeah, great, thank you.
Yep.
Thanks. Excited to be here. Thank you for having me. So today I'm going to be talking about power analysis and power mapping as tools for equity and transformation. I know you all just heard my intro, but just to introduce myself again, my name is Sari Bilick. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am calling in today from Berkeley, California on the unceded Lishan Ohlone land. That's in the Bay Area in Northern California. I'm the organizing program director at Human Impact Partners, and I'll say a little bit more about Human Impact Partners in a moment. And I also co-coordinate Public Health Awakened, as was mentioned in my bio, which is a national organizing network that you all are welcome to join if you're not already part of it. And you'll see the website here to if you want to join that network. And I have this photo of myself on my intro slide that I just like to share as just like a personal photo of me participating in a kayak action at the Chevron refinery in Richmond, California, around health and safety addressing health and safety issues at the Chevron refinery. So just a fun picture to give a little sense of some of the things I do. So I'm going to start by briefly introducing my organization, Human Impact Partners, or HIP as we call it. For those who haven't heard of us, Human Impact Partners is a national public health organization that's headquartered in the Bay Area in California, but with staff across the country, and our work is national. Our mission is to transform the field of public health to center equity and build collective power of social justice movements. We do this using several strategies, including policy-driven research, advocacy, organizing, communications and narrative change work, and capacity building with health departments and other government agencies around health equity, and bridging partnerships between health departments and community organizers. We work on a range of topics, but primarily focus on community safety, economic justice, housing and climate justice, and then we also touch on other issues as well. So this image shows HIP's theory of change. It shows a healthy community at the top. That's a vision for health equity, where everyone has what they need to be healthy and well, from fair paying jobs to access to healthy food and activities, regardless of race, gender, socioeconomic status, ability, sexual identity, etc. Just to be really clear, we haven't achieved this vision, and we believe that this is due to power imbalances and structural oppression, primarily racism, but also patriarchy, capitalism, and other forms of oppression. These have a reciprocal relationship and inform one another. Structural oppression creates power imbalances, and power imbalances then reinforce structural oppression. So these things shape the decisions and the conditions for health. Power imbalances and structural oppression work together to maintain the current conditions that keep many of us from accessing the resources we need to thrive. And the consequences are the injustices that you see at the bottom of the screen, which cause health inequities in our communities. Power imbalances and structural oppression are the most upstream root causes that we seek to change, since inequities in all of the social determinants of health stem from these. So today, our focus is really on the power piece, but of course, structural oppression is integrally tied to the power piece. So fair warning for this next slide is that I am going to try to ask you all to participate and be interactive, mostly through the chat, but we are later going to ask folks to go into breakout groups as well, but really invite folks to participate in the chat if you're able. So to start out with is if folks could just drop in the chat what comes to mind when you hear the word power. If you could just drop that in the chat, take a moment. Okay, I'm just going to read some of the things I'm seeing. Knowledge, privilege, inequity, control, authority, influence, white man, corruption, money, electricity, I like that one, success, resource control, imbalance, dominance. Great. Ability to affect change, security. Feel free to keep dropping them in there. What I'm really seeing in these words is the kind of theme of like dominance and control, which is how most of us think about power. And now I'm seeing someone put in resistance, right, which is sort of a different kind of definition of power. But I think most of us, when we think about power, we think of sort of a negative version of power that's really about dominance and control. This is a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King that we often use as a working definition of power. It's not perfect, but I wanted to share it today. So the quote is, power properly understood is nothing but the ability to achieve purpose. It is the strength required to bring about social, political, and economic change. So it's a little bit of a different definition than most of you put in your one word in the chat. And so with this definition, like we think about when the balance of power is out of balance, it means that one group has enormous capacity to shape laws, make meaning, and repress anything that threatens their hold on that power. But we also don't see power as good or bad. It just is, right? It operates everywhere at all times in every situation. Perceiving power as bad can limit our ability to recognize that we have a role to play in pivoting power's use towards good purpose. And then also just to name that power dimensions aren't static. Power can shift along the dimensions of identity, like gender, class, education, immigration status, etc. And you can feel disempowered based on one dimension of your identity, and you can feel empowered based on another dimension of your identity. We're all living at the intersection of all these identities, and every person's moving through the world, switching how they engage in the world based on what's valued and what's privileged within our culture and at any particular given time. But we all have inherent power and dignity, and it's the attempts to deny or restrict that causes harm and can limit power. But that's why building collective power, especially among people who have been denied it, is so important. And so getting into that personal versus collective power, right? It's really important for each of us to reflect on our personal power, and we could like do a whole other session on that. But today we're really going to focus on collective power. So collective power is what's needed to transform the systems and conditions that drive health and well-being. This is where many people are working together in an organized, aligned, and strategic way to change the systems and conditions that affect their lives. This type of power gives us the power to change and transform our systems and our communities. So personally, my background is in union organizing and community organizing, which is all about building collective power. The work that I've done has been based on the idea that a group of workers or tenants or community members can effectively make change by coming together and exercising their collective power to affect long-term change. And this process is often slow. It requires strategic planning, it requires relationship building, leadership development, skill building, and oftentimes a huge amount of personal and collective risk. So that's just like a little bit of a background on power. I will share some other resources and readings on power that you all can dig into later as a follow-up to this. But I want to get today into power mapping. So I'm going to do a quick intro to power analysis and power mapping. we're going to have time to look at how it might work with a sample campaign, and you'll have a chance to try out like a piece of that in groups, and then I'll pass on some tools that you can use later in your work to do power mapping on your own. So power mapping is a tool that organizers often use in campaigns to think about where we can focus our energy, who we can bring in, and how we can ultimately shift power through organizing. I want to introduce power mapping as both an organizing tool and a tool that we can use in a wide variety of contexts, including like our own institutions, our workplaces, and other organizing spaces that we may be part of. So power analysis and power mapping is ultimately a tool we can use with any specific change target in mind, and a team of people who have trust with each other and want to build a strategy to achieve a goal. So, excuse me, when I say change target, I mean a policy or a practice that we want to change, right? So it's like our goal, what are we trying to achieve? The change target can be internal to our workplace or our school. It may be that we want to collaborate more closely with community partners, or we want a stronger focus on race and power incorporated into curriculum. Thank you, and I got the note about slowing down. I will try to slow down, apologies. So the change target can be internal, as I said. It can also be an external change target or policy focus. For example, we might want to pass a statewide paid sick leave policy, or we want to shift county budgets away from policing and towards health and community safety. We'll talk a little bit about doing a power analysis, the questions that we need to ask, as well as power mapping, which is the visual for how we do our power analysis. So I want to ask folks if you can either use an emoji reaction or drop in the chat if you've ever done power mapping. And I'm sure there's people in this group who have and haven't, so just want to kind of get a sense. So any sort of reaction or just drop in the chat a yes or no. Seeing a lot of no's in the chat. Somebody did once, not formally, great. If there is anybody who has done power mapping, if you also want to drop in the chat like what kind of campaigns or projects you've used it for. But I'm seeing mostly no's. Yeah, so any of the folks who are saying yes, if you want to just say if there's a particular campaign. Abortion legislation, great. Thank you for sharing that. So a Georgia governor's race for fair voting practices, increased funding within a city department, food waste collections in community. Great, these are really great examples and sort of show the range of the things you can use it for. Violence prevention resources for families. Great. Why do we do a power analysis or power mapping? So one is to identify the universe of people and groups that have the potential to advance or block our goals. So this is the power analysis. Then next is to create a visual of how much power these people and groups hold and how aligned they are with our agenda. And this is the power mapping. And then lastly, to provide guidance on where to focus our organizing efforts for the biggest impact. So these are some questions that you want to ask at the beginning of your process. This can happen in a group setting with people who will be involved in the campaign or the project. For your own research or your own, if you're doing this for your own research or your own project, this might mean going outside your team and bringing in community partners or community power building organizations who know the landscape and bringing them into your power analysis process. These are questions that in an organizing campaign or context, organizers may ask themselves. These might not be the right questions or the right tool for you, but I want to show you tools that you could apply to your own context. Of course, you can modify these questions to fit your context, your campaign, your project. So just going through each of the questions, what is the change we're trying to make? So that's really like identifying what is your change target. Hopefully you already know this going into doing a power analysis. What will it take to win? Who has the decision-making power to make that change happen? What power do we need to exercise to win? Who is in support of our goals and agenda? Who's opposed to our goals and agenda? Who's not yet organized? And when we talk about who's not organized, this can be people or groups that we can move to support us, but it could also be people or groups that the opposition can move to oppose us. What will it take to move more people to support us? And how will winning ultimately shift power? So just a reminder that while these questions are framed around an external organizing campaign, we can answer these same questions internally for a change we're trying to make within our own institutions. So power mapping is a tool we can use to visually represent our power analysis and think about how we shift power. Scope LA is an organization that's been at the forefront of training many organizers on power mapping. What I'm going to present today isn't exactly their frame, but many organizers we've worked with have been trained on power mapping using their framework. So I want to give them credit for for doing a lot of work around power mapping. So for the way that I'm going to present it today, we have this is our power map. We have two axes that are around. The horizontal axis is support for our agenda, and the vertical axis is amount of power. Right, so you can see that the horizontal axis goes from left is sort of die hard against us to on the right, die hard support for us. And then power, right, we have like not on the radar at the bottom, can get attention taken into account, going up to power to have influence on decision-making, participant in decision-making, or decisive decision-making power. So what are we mapping? Who we're putting on the map is our universe. So we're gonna plot each thing on the map, we're gonna plot people and groups on the map according to their power and support. Throughout our campaign, we can move these people and groups as things shift. We can use different colors or shapes to represent different groups that we identified in our power and landscape analysis. So the decision makers, the allies, the opposition, etc. I will share some template slides later that you can use to do this virtually with a team. However, if you were doing this in person, you could also do this on big paper using Post-its or cut out shapes, something that could be movable so that you could change it as conditions change. Once you plot the groups on the map, you'll take a look at each quadrant to think about your next steps. And we'll go through like what that looks like with a sample campaign. Okay, so we're going to use a sample, like a hypothetical sample campaign to practice this today. The sort of like quote unquote hypothetical campaign that I'm going to bring you today is actually based on a real campaign, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But the example we'll use today might look really different than how you would use this with a team that you're working on or for your own project or campaign, but this is just to give you a sense of how the tool is used. So as I said, I'm basing this hypothetical campaign on a real campaign that was led by public health folks around 2016 to 2018. So for this campaign, we as a group are a collective of public health practitioners and students, and we're working to pass a policy statement with the American Public Health Association, APHA, naming police violence as a public health crisis using an abolitionist framework. So this is a real campaign that did happen in 2016 to 2018, and ultimately that statement was passed by APHA after a several-year campaign. I know probably many folks here were involved in that campaign, and I know Radical Public Health was involved in that campaign. But I just want to say that, like, I say it's hypothetical because I'm not gonna use exactly the people and the players that were involved, and sort of just use it as an example.
Do you mind repeating the goal?
Yeah. So it's and I can even drop it in the chat. So we're a collective of public health practitioners and students, and we're working to pass a policy statement with the American Public Health Association naming police violence as a public health crisis using an abolitionist framework. And I'm actually going to just type those words into the chat so that you all can see them. So for this campaign, we want to first think about what are the smaller, and we're not going to go through this whole process together as a group as we would. It's a much longer process, but we'd first want to name some of the smaller fights and campaigns that will need to happen. Right before we even start our power map, we want to think about what we're trying to do at a more granular level than just our change target. So this can be other wins that need to happen, people that need to be moved, work that needs to be done to set the stage for our campaign, and ultimately changing hearts and minds. So that we would go through that. We're not going to go through that today, but that's something we could do. So then we would want to think about who are the decision makers, right? And so for this, we're going to use these, whatever color this is, orange triangles or diamonds, whatever shape that is, to name the decision makers. If this was your campaign, you'd go through and identify the decision makers. For this, I'm just like going ahead and doing it for us. So for this particular scenario, the decision makers that I'm going to put on the map are the APHA Governing Council. This is the body of people that votes on policy statements. And then the other decision maker I'm going to put on is what's called the APHA Joint Policy Committee, which is the body of people that review the proposed policy statements and decide if they're going to move forward to a vote. Then we're going to look at our allies, right? So I have these as yellow squares. And for this exercise, I'm going to list, more generic groups. But if you were doing this yourself, you would likely list specific groups or very specific people that you're more familiar with. So just because this is like based on a real campaign, I'm going to go ahead and put Radical Public Health on here as an ally, as a specific group. I'm going to put public health students, I think, would be allies, social justice focused sections of APHA. I think that there's APHA specific leaders within APHA who will be allies. And, if this was a real example, we could list those specific people. And then I'm also going to name local and national abolitionist orgs who will likely be allies. And then looking at who's our opposition, so these green rectangles. So for this, I think I'm going to name the overall APHA leadership as opposition, police associations, right? Maybe police associations are going to hear about this and be vocally opposed. And then some specific APHA sections that may be opposed as well. And then lastly, the red circles, ovals, are who is unorganized. So again, this is people who might support or oppose us, but who are not yet organized. So I'm going to list generally APHA membership as unorganized, specific members of the governing council, that just the voting body, the wider public health community, right? This is a group that could potentially put pressure on APHA from the outside, and maybe health equity focused public health orgs. And again, we could list specifics if we were really doing this. And then last I'll say is that if you were doing this, you would want to make sure to put your own group on the map. So that's like, could be an exercise with the folks you're doing this with of like, how do you identify your own power and how would you place yourself on the map? The ultimate outcome is that based on what you map, you can create a plan for where you want to focus your time and energy, and think about who you need to shift their power and their support in order to reach your desired change. So rather than us doing this all together in this large group of people, I just sort of put everybody on a map on the map for us. You know, again, this is something you would take a lot of time to do, and you'd think about the placement of each group, but I just went ahead and placed some of these groups on the map for us. So the decision makers, and again, that's these ones right here. We're placing, they hold a lot of power, as you can see, so they're high on the power axis, but we're placing them somewhat in the middle of support because we don't actually know where they stand. We want to move them to be supportive. We have a number of allies, so that is the yellow ones that support the issue to varying degrees, right? So then we have them all sort of on the right side because they're allies. They support the issue to varying degrees, but many of them hold minimal amounts of power. And so we want to think about how we increase the power and the support of these groups. Our opposition, that's the green, is probably not worth spending time on, though in some cases it could be strategic. But we want them on our power map so that we're paying attention to them. It might be helpful to know what their messaging is, who they're moving, etc. So we want them on our power map. And then with unorganized groups, that's the ovals. We want to prioritize who, if anyone, we want to focus on, and who we might want to just keep on our radar. So again, like if it's an unorganized group that could be moved against us, we want to just pay attention to them. If we think that we can move them to support us or increase their power, we may want to factor that into our campaign planning. And then also just to note that you might be the target of someone else's power map. So depending on where you work or who you're organizing with, organizers may be thinking about where your institution sits, how much you support their campaign, and how they can move you. And so by understanding this tool, you can also understand how you're an actor and how the tool is being used. And so, you know, once we make our power map, we're sort of going to look at these in terms of quadrants and in terms of where people are placed. So just to say that so we have the horizontal support axis. When we place people in the middle of the support spectrum, it may mean that they're neutral on the issue, or it just might mean that we don't know where they stand. So, you know, I put APHA members here, not because APHA members are neutral, but just like we don't know where they stand. Same with the governing council. So this is an opportunity to educate those people about the issues to move them towards active support. And then similarly, the middle of the power axis, it might mean that they hold some amount of power, or it just might mean that we don't know how much power they have. These groups, as well as our supporters with low power, are ones where we can focus, like we can focus on increasing their power, right? When we, so for like our allies or the unorganized folks who are sort of in the middle of power, of the power axis. We, you know, might want to hold educational, for this campaign, we might want to hold educational sessions about the issues, identifying how they might connect, and then organizing, you know, students, for example, to sign petitions or to speak out or to show up at APHA hearings or talk to to support the statement or talk to their classmates. This makes like folks more visible presence in the campaign, which therefore increases their power to influence the decisions. And so then talking about the quadrants for a moment, so the top right over here, this green section, is high support and high power. So these are our strongest allies that we want to make sure we bring these people in, that we get their support, get them to take action, and ask them to bring more supporters. The bottom right, so that's this quadrant over here, is high support, high support and low power. So these are also our strong allies, but they may be unorganized or not hold as much power. This is likely a group we want to focus on to increase their power and increase their support. The top left, low support and high power, this is who we need to pay attention to, understand what they're saying, how are they moving people, what's their messaging. But if they're strongly against us, it's probably not worth our time to try and shift them. However, people with lots of power who are more neutral or unknown, right? So looking at these folks in the middle, are worth energy to try to shift their support. And then the bottom left, low support and low power, we don't actually have anyone here, but these are people we want to keep an eye on, but we probably wouldn't put a lot of energy here. So that's like what your power map might look like. So after we do our power map, it's going to be important to reflect on the power map, right? So you might spend, an hour or two or a couple sessions actually putting all those folks on the map and thinking about it. And then after we do that, we want to go back and ask ourselves some questions. So what do we notice? These are just general observations. Then we want to look at how much power people and groups have in relation to one another. And once we see those relationships, we may actually want to shift it, right? And so we might literally just move the people on the map to a new place. Then we want to look at how can we increase our own power and how can we increase our allies' power? And then how can we decrease our opposition's power? And then we want to look at who's missing, right? We can go back and add more groups or people. We might realize that we forgot some people and groups. Where do we need to put our energy? So this could be on the leaning supporters or those who are neutral. It can also be focusing on folks who have power but are not yet on our side, or thinking about how we can increase our own power. We also want to think about where it's worth not putting our energy. Then we want to look at which decision makers should we focus on, and what unorganized groups should we focus on bringing in. And then we can look at what connections we can draw on the map. So are there groups or people that have influence over other groups, right? And you can even start to draw lines on the map, right? This group who's really supportive of us actually has a lot of influence over this unorganized group. So how can we use them to increase the support of this other group? As we go through these questions, we can move things around. And as our campaign continues, we come back to the power map and reassess where we are, what's changed, and where our focus should be. I'm going to drop a link into the chat with, and I'll share these later, but I'll put it in the chat for now, to template slides with the power map and these questions. And you can make a copy of these slides and use them for your own organizing. And I'll send these out again, but I just dropped that link in the chat. Okay, and now I'm going to go backwards a little bit. I talked about power mapping, but now I'm going to go backwards to talk about landscape analysis. In order to answer some of the key questions for our power analysis, we have to know the landscape that we're working in. So doing a landscape analysis is something that you'd want to do before a power analysis or power mapping. I'm going to give a brief overview of the landscape analysis. We're going to have some time in groups to think about our own landscape analysis. And then I'm going to pass on some tools for you to go deeper with this. So landscape analysis is a process that allows you to systematically identify the people, communities, agencies, and organizations who can positively or negatively impact the success of your campaign or initiative. So we might do a landscape analysis when we're launching a campaign or project, preparing to do a power map, launching a new program, or even to change internal practices in our own organization. Success often depends on knowing who has an interest in our issue, who has the power to block our desired outcome, and who are our strong allies. We want to identify ultimately who the players are, and that's who we're going to put on our power map. Once we identify players, we want to see where the gaps are in our knowledge and in our relationships. So are there people we need to talk to better understand the landscape? Are there groups we know but need to build better relationships with or learn more about to understand where they fit in our landscape? And then we can also think about where relationships exist among the players in our landscape, who knows each other, who leads each other, who influences each other. And I see that there's a couple questions coming in the chat. I'm gonna keep going through this and we can come back to the questions in the chat. So that is the landscape analysis. So I'm gonna ask folks to go into breakout groups, and I think that for whoever's making the breakout groups, I think if we do about 15 minutes, that will be great. In the breakout groups, I'm going to give you all some solo work time and then some time to discuss. So I'll explain what we're doing. We're gonna, as I said, we're gonna have some solo work time where you all are welcome to unmute and ask each other questions while you're doing your solo work. And then in the group we'll have time, in the small groups we'll have time to share back what you did in your solo work time. This is really supposed to be a really short intro to this, and you'll have the tools to go deeper later. So I am gonna put a link in the chat, and this is gonna prompt you to make a copy of a Google Doc. So hopefully that works for you all, but when you click on it, it's going to say make a copy, and you should end up with a document that or a slide that looks like this slide that I'm showing now. So hopefully that works for folks, and if it doesn't, you can just work on a piece of paper or document with these same prompts. So what we're going to do is take about 7 minutes in the breakout groups, but on your own, to fill out the slide for a campaign or a project that you're working on. If you don't have anything in mind that you're working on, feel free to make something up, right? You could be like, the change I want to make is this, and what would it take to do that? So it doesn't have to be real. You could just make something up. But if you have a project or something that you're working on, go ahead and use that as an example. So at the top, you're going to fill in your change target or your campaign goal. Then in the table, just start to list people or organizations who are the decision makers, allies, opposition, and unorganized. And again, particularly if you're using a real project or campaign you're working on, get as specific as possible. So you can list a generic group of people, but you can also be like this person, right? You can list specific city council members. You can list specific administrators at your school, or specific people within your institution. And this is just your own. You're not sharing it publicly with anybody, so get as specific as you can. And then this bottom section, the gaps, unknowns, questions box, you just make note as you're going through this of any gaps in your own knowledge about who's in your landscape, or any information you might need in order to move forward in mapping groups in a power analysis, or any other questions that come up. So you might be going through this and you might say, I actually don't know who the decision makers are, right? Or this group, I think that they're an ally, but I don't know that group well, or I don't have connections there. So note those down in the gaps, unknowns, and questions section. And then as you work independently for about 7 minutes or so, feel free to unmute and ask a question to the group if needed. And then after about 7 minutes, if folks can just come back together, and we can give I think hopefully we can give a message through a message while you're in your breakouts for folks to, after about 7 minutes, to come back together, and for folks in the small groups to share what you came up with, right? So you can share what your campaign is, who the players you identified are, what gaps and questions you still have, or like share how the exercise was for you, right? If it was hard, if it was easy. So just having any conversation. And if you all look at the slides that you have, if you open that document, in the notes section of the slide, these directions are written down. So if you need a refresher on what I just said, it's all written in that slide. Sound good? And I'm not sure who, Katie or Emily, who's making the breakout groups.
So the breakout rooms, you'll see that option very, very shortly. I just want to mention that if you're a Spanish speaking and would like to do this activity in Spanish, please stay in the main group.
Make sure to select a language channel again. I believe once you go in the breakout rooms, it boots you from the language channel. So just make sure to select either English or Spanish again.
Okay, are we ready to start?
I think so.
Okay,
yeah.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for trying out that. I hope there was some good discussion in the group. So I just wanted to ask folks to drop in the chat, like, how was that exercise? Is there anything you learned or realized? If you just like drop a reaction or a couple words in the chat. And like, if it was hard, if you didn't know what to come up with, great. I'm seeing one person saying hard to do alone. Yes, this is not an exercise that you would normally do alone. So definitely a challenge for practice. Yeah, there's some clarification needed. It was thought-provoking. I'm seeing a couple comments about the unorganized was a little confusing. Made me assess change from a different angle. It was hard to think about who to mobilize. It was helpful. Yeah, I see someone saying that sometimes people fall into multiple categories. Decision makers are also sometimes opposition. Yeah, like, can you put people in multiple categories? Great. I'm gonna like leave those questions sort of lingering, and we can come back to them. So this very short time that working on the landscape analysis was just meant to give you a taste of what the landscape analysis is, to help you start to identify the gaps in what you know, and start thinking about the next steps before you get into your power mapping. HIP has some tools to do a deeper landscape analysis, and a template like potential partner opponent table. So I'm going to drop the link in the chat for that. And again, I'll share these materials afterwards, but I'll put them in the chat for folks who want to see them now. Let's see. Okay, so for next steps, right, and like some of you might have used real campaigns, some of you might have used hypothetical campaigns, but if this is a real campaign, for your next steps after doing this, you would want to take some time to look back at the landscape scan you started and to fill out and identify who you need to talk to fill in your gaps. So are there people who might be able to help you fill in the gaps? Are there organizations you want to reach out to learn more about their work? Is there some research that you need to do to learn about the orgs in your landscape? So you can look at the activities in the HIP landscape analysis tools that I just dropped in the chat and see if these are activities you'd want to do with others in your team. After you do that landscape scan, you can use your template power map to help you plan next steps in your campaign. This is the same link I shared, but I'm going to drop that template power map in the chat again. And this is, again, it's a slide deck that you can make a copy of to use for your power map. And as I mentioned, in addition to those links I showed in the chat, I will also share some further readings you can do that get a little bit more into power. And you can always reach out with any questions. And let me just share my screen one more time so that you all have my contact info. Okay. So there we go. You know, I'll keep this up on the screen so that you can have my info. But you know, I want to invite folks to think about those next steps and think about what you can do, right? And who are you going to talk to? What's the research that you need to do? And then I'll pass on those materials, and you all should look at the materials. Feel free to reach out if you have questions or comments about the presentation or about any of those materials. So we'll take some time for more question and answer, but I did want to just get to like some of when people just were dropping in, like kind of how was this activity? And I saw a lot of questions about having people in multiple categories. And so like just the quick answer to that I wanted to say was like, yes, like absolutely, there's going to be like your opposition will sometimes be the decision makers, and your allies, right, might also be the decision makers. There was one question of, could unorganized be the same people as allies? Yes, for sure. But in some ways, the unorganized people are maybe going to be a little bit less specific than your allies. So I would tend to put an ally, for an ally, I might put a specific person, or I might put a specific group, and unorganized might be a more generic group of people. So I might say like students in the School of Public Health, right? As opposed to, you know, allies might be, you know, this particular student group, or, you know, this particular, you know, this particular organization. So yes, I think there can absolutely be overlap, and unorganized tends to just be like more of a broader group. And then just like in terms of people's comments around like it's hard to narrow down a target or a goal, I think that like if you were going into this, you know, I just threw at you like come up with an example. If you're going into this with an actual campaign in mind, you would hopefully already have that target or a goal of something you were already working on before you really dove deep into this. So just wanted to address some of those things. But I think that is all I have. Again, just in terms of check out humanimpact.org, which is Human Impact Partners website, and then publichealthawaken.org is the National Public Health Organizing Network that I lead, and it's a listserv, and you're welcome to join there. And And then check us out on social media. We have social media for both Human Impact Partners and Public Health Awakened. Public Health Awakened is on Instagram, and both are on Facebook and Twitter. So with that, I think that, yeah, thank you for putting that link in the chat, Katie. With that, I think that that's it for my presentation. And I'll share some of the resources with you all later.
Thank you so much for that amazing presentation and applicable way for us to kind of do this and for sharing those resources. We're gonna take a 3-minute break and then we'll come back for questions. Thank you. Please have your questions ready. Any questions, please feel free to come off mute.
I'll come off mute to ask my question. So yeah, I put in the chat, what are some achievements you have had in using the power mapping tool, especially with unions, just with it being a lot in the news recently?
Yeah, great question. I can try to answer the question about unions. I've used it in many contexts. So I've been working in public health space for a while, so it's been several years since I've been in union spaces. So some of the more recent fights, right, I've been like more disconnected too, but I will share sort of in my past union organizing experience. I did a lot of union organizing with hospital workers where I was, you know, really doing like organizing within a hospital. And so I think a tool like this, we would use this tool or similar tools to think about the hospital I was organizing at, right? We were in contract negotiations, and at some point it became necessary to go on strike, and thinking about like, how do we have a successful strike, right? Our change target was like, get a majority of workers to go on strike to send a strong message to management, you know, and so, you know, we would spend, you know, several weeks where we needed to make sure folks were ready and willing to go on strike. And so we might use something like this to actually look at like specific departments within the hospital and specific workers in the hospital and who, you know, who's already ready to go, like who's ready to go on strike. Who are the, like, what are the departments that are like, they're not ready to go on strike now, but they're actually really significant. And it's like really important that they go on strike because they have a lot of influence. And, you know, who are the folks who we're like not connected with and we don't know within the hospital, like, and that we like maybe need to spend some time like finding those workers and getting to know those workers. And then of course, like there's always like your opposition. So, and, you know, I'm talking about it in a context of like, who are the workers? There's of course like management and stuff, but in, I think the context that I would use this in the union context was really like who, like looking at the universe was really workers and like who's going to support the strike and who's not. And so after doing an exercise like this, we might say, okay, like the, you know, the radiology department, if they go on strike, that sends a really strong message to the management because they're really, really critical in the hospital. And right now the radiology department is maybe not quite on our side. So like who that are our allies know the folks in radiology and can go talk to them to try to like make them understand why the strike as a tactic is important, right? Or like this other department in the hospital, right? Maybe it's like the housekeepers, they're not really connected to what's going on. They're like, I would call them unorganized, right? But it's like, again, they're really crucial. Like the hospital would really shut down if they went on strike. And so how do we talk to those people to get them on board, right? And so that's like an example of how I might use it with like a group of workers. You know, many other examples, you'd go much more broad of like who's, you know, we're trying to pass this policy and who's the city council member who are in support of us, and who are the city council members who are opposed to us, and how do we talk to them? But that's sort of one example. I've used it in a really, really specific sort of slow organizing context.
Yeah, I'd like to ask a question based on your advice. I've been working on a campaign for about 2 years as a patient and a patient advocate, working with urologists, pathologists, radiation oncologists to try to change a designation of a certain diagnosis from cancer to non-cancer, if you're with me. And this has happened with some other diseases. And the implication of it now is patients experience emotional distress because they're defined as having cancer, or financial toxicity. They have problems buying new insurance policies, not health insurance, but life insurance, things like that. So which levers can you press? And I should point out, I mean, this goes totally against the mainstream of urology, pathology, and all the other ologies. But the urologists are split in half. The pathologists are 90% against it. This is based on surveys. Patients are sort of neutral, but one of the big issues, and I'll stop after this, is whether patients will abandon care if this cancer is redefined as a non-cancer. I did a survey, and big survey, and only 5% patients said they'd quit. 82% said they'd stick with the program. But what are some smart things that we can do to win this?
Yeah, I think I'm not going to give the best answer to this, because I'm not super familiar with the issue. I think that one thing I want to name, and maybe I said this, maybe I didn't, is that I think that a power analysis and power mapping is different than a campaign plan, right? It is a tool that we can use to inform our campaign plan. So I could do a whole other training about campaign planning. And this is really only one piece of it. And so the power analysis and power mapping is really like looking at our universe, seeing where folks sit and what might be needed. And then we can do a campaign plan to put that into practice. So I want to say that in response to your question, just to say, like, I don't want to lay out a campaign plan for you. I'm going to try to focus it on the power mapping. But I think that for you, I would say that list of questions that I started with to look at before you do your power map is probably a good place to start. So let me just pull it up for myself. So the questions of what will it take to win? Who has the decision-making power? Who's in support, right? Kind of go through those questions, and hopefully that illuminates some things for you. And then I think that what I hear you naming is that there's some outstanding questions that need to be figured out in order to move forward, of how is our change going to impact patients, right? And that's going to help you think about when you're thinking about patients and being a patient advocate, right? Are the patients going to be in support or in opposition, right? And maybe patients are your unorganized group, and they're somewhere in the middle because you don't really know where they sit. And when you map them out, you realize that what's going to make them go, to the opposition or support is the answer to this question about how is it going to change their care? And so then you have to back up, and there's some steps of what's the education we need to do to patients? How are we going to reach those patients, right? And that's getting more into what your campaign plan is. But I think that the power map can help illuminate some of the bigger questions that need to be addressed before you can move forward. So again, I feel like I don't have a full answer for you because I'm not super familiar with it, but I think that using this tool is a way to figure out what is needed.
Well, thank you.
Thank you so much. There's one last question in the chat that I think is good as a framing on how do we build goals around this, or is this a good example? So Gloria Alfonso said, I did a landscape analysis regarding to convince insurance companies to cover medical procedures for patients without needing authorizations. Do you think that was a good goal?
So the goal was to convince insurance companies to cover medical procedures for patients without needing authorizations. Yes, I think that I think a goal that sounds to me like it's probably a policy goal. And I think a policy goal is great, right? Like it could be really, your goal can be really big and really broad, right? It could be like pass this legislation, right? Yeah, so I think that, you know, the way I could see this getting more specific is maybe, yeah, is it convincing insurance companies is a little vague. Maybe it's like, maybe there's some change in the regulations or some change in policy, right? And the more specific you are, the easier it's going to be to do the power map, because then you can get at who are the decision makers, right? So are the decision makers the insurance company, or are the decision makers actually like some sort of regulatory body that has to put a policy in place? So I think that when we identify our change target or goal, and then we start to map who the players are, we may realize that our change target needs to get a little bit more specific. Because it may be like, yeah, if you don't have a clear channel to the insurance companies, or they all operate independently, right? Then maybe there's another way to go about that that's through policy or through regulation.
Thank you. That's a great explanation, a good way to help us frame. So we're just going to close out, but I do want to thank our speaker today for the amazing topic and walking us through that. I just want to remind us that next week we have Students for Justice in Palestine. So please join us again next week. Reminder, the Zoom will stay open for those of you taking the course. Please go to the breakout room and we'll start at 7:06. Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thank you.